Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Alex Wolff to talk all about his latest film, Pig. And I wanted to start by talking about some of the research that you did because you looked a lot at books like The Truffle Underground and Truffle Boy.
Yeah,
And it sounds like you even had the opportunity to get close to the author of Truffle Boy as well and have a lot of direct conversations. And so I
yeah.
was really interested from that research element what some of the key aspects were that you started building out into your character within the film.
I mean, I think there was an enormous amount of information. I mean, I knew nothing before, and I mean, I couldn't have gone from more 0 to 100 in terms of just knowledge about truffles. Luckily, it's really fascinating. It's not some boring thing. It's as if it's really like The Sopranos. It's this, and it's also a very interesting fungus in that there's no way you can really plant it or grow it. It has to be you set the seeds up for something good, and then really it has to if it rains too much they die, if it doesn't rain enough it dies, and if you take them out they're alive for 5 days and then they die, they're not good anymore. And so probably I was interested in the metaphor of if it's very similar to creativity, of how quickly it can ripen and rot, and how some of the parallels of maybe the competitive nature of what we're doing, but also I just found it to be really fascinating. So that was the main thing, is that I just was like, this is a crazy thing. I didn't know anything about it. People are killing their dogs for it, and there's people who are murdered over it. It's really like the mob or something, reading about it. But it seems like such an esoteric, like small community that nobody outside the little truffle bubble knows about. But it turns out it's coveted, and there's fakes, and it's a lot like diamonds and things. But then with that, what I ended up, I feel like taking the most, because I did take all that information and made me feel I was stacked, and I was kind of the truffle expert on set. I would say, oh, these don't really look like them, and because I got so deep into it. But the main thing was that I really learned a lot from Ian Perkiyasta, who wrote the book. I think I'm pronouncing his last name right. And I took more from him than I think he would even know or be comfortable with. Do you have a cat right there?
Yeah.
Yeah, cute. Hello. Oh my goodness. Hi. Hello. Wow, that's a beautiful cat. What's his or her name?
Casper.
Casper, the friendly ghost.
Yeah.
Okay, get the fuck out of here, Casper. Just kidding. Um, wow, look at that tail. So needy. He could feel that you were giving attention to someone else.
He could.
Um, but yeah, I really kind of found that he started off a bit showboaty, and there were qualities of him I just had to really take, regardless of if he gave me permission or not. And I think probably if he's seen the movie, he probably recognizes some parts of himself that maybe he's not as proud of, or maybe he just sees as part of him. But I took a lot from that book, and then just a lot from me. I really connected with it. I think that's why I connected with the character, and I connected with him and his book, is that like it or not, that's a real big part of being someone who needs to make a name for themselves. I think there has got to be some kind of narcissism and some kind of like a boisterous showmanship.
And obviously, we learn where a lot of his vulnerabilities and insecurities stem from throughout the film, and in particular with his relationship with his dad. But I thought it was so interesting to build a performance in that way, where there is that external showboat element that you're talking about, but underneath there's a lot of vulnerability that comes out gradually throughout the film. And was there consciousness in thinking about how you wanted him to gradually bring his guard down and to reveal that side of himself, or was it really about feeling it out through specific scenes?
Always feeling it out through specific scenes for me. I think that sometimes my main way into characters is to find what their vulnerability is, I think, because as a person, I'm very vulnerable, and how I connect with other people is through vulnerability. Almost always. I think humor can be vulnerable, whatever. And so I think that it was very obvious to me how vulnerable it was. It was very at the forefront. So I felt like I had to do everything in my power to downplay it through how he looked, and being so but having a yellow car and having all these things felt so vulnerable to me and embarrassing, and so it was really, I wanted to hold it off as long as I possibly could with him, and lead with as much bravado as I could, and braggadocio and all that. But I think that naturally, no matter what character I play, there's going to be vulnerability that seeps out. It's just me as a guy. And if there's not, it took a lot of effort. So with him, I think it was about really strapping him with things that cut off the vulnerability. So then as it poured out, it was more of a surprise and more moving.
And with the bravado as well, there, you mentioned the car, but there's a real physicality to a lot of his bravado that he exudes as well. There's, the way that he gels his hair back. And I think you mentioned that you even kind of sprayed on like a little bit more cologne than you needed. And I was interested
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that kind of detailing. Was that about creating a real sensory experience of the character, or what are some of the sides that helped you to tap into by doing that?
Well, it's funny because like, yeah, it was starting out as like just what I thought he would do, like uh, I don't exactly know why. It's just something about it felt right that I did. And then it became like an OCD thing. Like it became like, well, that's him. So I have to do that every morning. And I remember every morning it was just too much. And I like the feeling of embarrassment as, but also, it's really hard to explain, but I don't know if you've ever worn too much perfume somewhere or something, but it's a real thing. Like you sit down, you just see it affect people around you. And that, I don't know, that experience was just very helpful. And that I've noticed almost always, if someone is wearing too much, there's something there hiding. There's something there. There just is always. If there's a little too much, especially with men. I think when there's too much cologne, it's some kind of overcompensation. So I just got addicted to that, and I loved it. And I
And
threw it out right after.
perfect. Did you feel like there was kind of a dichotomy to the way that you had to create this character? Because, he has to be able to show up at Nicolas Cage's character, to Rob's farm, where he's there with truffles and he's there with pigs and it's, he's having conversations in the mud. And then he also has to be able to walk into Michelin star restaurants and have conversations with there. And he's kind of existing in these two very different worlds for his profession. And so did you see there being two different sides to who he is in those spaces?
I mean, I really thought, no, like he hates going to the mud. Like that's the part of his job he hates. Like I think because he feels so dirty inside, I think he feels so not held, and it's so important for him to be clean and to smell good and to come off pristine, that him walking in the mud is a nightmare, and seeing the pig, it's all a nightmare for him. I think he's one of these people who, he's just like, hey, fuck up to the pig, because I think it's ugh, stop, everything's so but again, anyone who wipes too much, wants to be too clean, it's always a bit of a red flag for me.
Yeah. And some of the other research was also, into the fact that Amir listens to a lot of classical music, but he's not even specifically listening to classical music. He's listening to people talk about classical music, which is a whole other dynamic. And what did the fact that that's what he chooses to listen to tell you about when you were doing research into Beethoven and classical music?
um it just said everything about the pretentiousness, that he wasn't even listening to music. He was just trying to learn about it so he could talk about it. And so I think his way in is the only way he could deal with anything is through intellectualizing it, and keeping it far away and pushing it away. And I think, his dad probably loves classical music, and I think that's a way so he can know about it. I think he just wants to be in the know and on top. And so he listens to that. But I also just think it's something to impress. I don't know who he's trying to impress. I think it's just, we all do things like that. We all read books we don't really want to, but we think it's looks good or it's cool for us. And that's the thing I loved about Amir. In some ways, he's just a more brash, heightened, focused version of this part of ourselves we neglect on a 24/7 basis. And if we don't neglect it, it's embarrassing to be with that kind of a person.
Yeah. And I love the moment where you're in the car and you've got you know, the conversation about classical music playing on the radio, and then Nicolas Cage just kind of immediately hits it off, and there was such like a look of surprise in your reaction to it, as if no one, you know, no one's ever dared to kind of say no or do that sort of thing before.
And I turned
Was
it back
that,
on.
yeah, was that a reaction that you kind of knew in advance that that was how you wanted him to respond in that moment?
I never plan react. I mean, I don't plan anything really. I mean, I kind of just, that's the tough thing about getting the lines down and things is that, I really don't want to waste any of because if you're listening to it and someone just does that, it's just, who would do that? It's just crazy. It's a crazy thing. So I think I just, reacted in the moment to him. And I think that was the first day of filming actually. And it was a really incredible moment for me. Um, yeah, I didn't really plan that out, but it's something I really laugh at when I see the movie. Because at the very end, he turns it off himself. He turns it on and then turns it off. I think he's come to too deep and true of a place to be listening to just like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to listen to this right now.
And overall, with all of your scenes with Nicolas Cage, it's such an interesting dynamic and pacing because your character is giving a lot of externalization and a lot of dialogue in the first half of the movie. And he's really getting nothing back, which must be such an interesting energy dynamic to have to play into as an
Yeah.
actor because it creates all these uncomfortable silences that you have to play into. And then you kind of become part of the uncomfortable silence as well once he's processing a lot of the internalization of himself later on. And so, how did that influence the beats and working with Nicolas Cage on a lot of those scenes with that in mind?
Yeah, it was actually, I thought, yeah, that part was hard. That part was hard because, you're doing a lot of talking and going off of reactions. And I think a lot of the way people communicate in real life is verbally. I mean, that's a huge part of that's you talk, especially me as a person, I talk a decent amount. So it was perfectly uncomfortable in that it was, you do feel this need to fill the space. And it's kind of moving watching someone realize they don't have to do that towards as they develop as a person, they realize. And I've noticed as I get older, you talk a little bit less. And maybe for me, no one would notice that because I'm a talker. But I find that sometimes uncomfortable silences are okay. And it's not this, you don't have this desperate need to fill in that space. So it was tough, but it was really, Nick is so, you look in his eyes and he's saying so much with just his face. You can feel the heat off his face from his acting. Um, so it makes it easier. But yeah, that was tough. That was an interesting thing. I haven't done that much of just talking and talking without someone responding is perfectly uncomfortable.
And one of the scenes in particular that's really interesting to watch you play, where he's become much quieter later in the film, is when when Amir's at his father's house and has cooked the meal with Rob, because there's that moment where he's single-handedly, within the span of a few minutes, watched his father break down into tears, and then watched Rob break down into tears, and the whole time you're just kind of standing there as an observer to all of these moments. And so I was interested in what the dynamic of filming those scenes and those moments in the film were for you.
Hmm. Well, when someone's got to do some of those scenes, you really got to stay out of their way. So I think that's the important thing, is stay out of their way as much as you can, because it's really hard to do those things. It's everything is hard in different ways, but it requires, I think, a lot of focus. And when someone does that, it's as if, they're getting naked or something. You gotta, really respect it and be really gentle. And Yeah, I'm always a fan of if someone has an emotional scene, there's just no reason to be talking. Or I think sometimes people talk and goof around because it makes them uncomfortable. Um, Someone being that raw, but it's always really nice if you just sit in that silence of someone if they need to go through that. But sometimes like at the dinner table, I said that for whatever reason we were just in uproarious laughter before Adam did a scene, and sometimes that's the right thing to do. But you just vibe it out. And we all know when a person has their moment, and you got to vibe it out. If I have my moment, I like people to just kind of wait to see because sometimes I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be serious. I just want to laugh and then go into it. But you gotta just feel it out. So I think as an actor, I was just watching these people go through these real emotions, and I think that just blended into the character. And hopefully, if you're doing it for long enough, for a few weeks or whatever, you start to just feel, you and your character start to be kind of lined up in terms of your emotions and feelings, and you start to react in a similar maybe way to him. So it was nice, leaning back and getting to see them open up like that. It was really special.
Yeah. And, you and Nicolas Cage only had the opportunity, it sounds like, to meet a couple of weeks before you started filming. And in a lot of interviews, you've mentioned that you both came into shooting this film off the back of, having personally challenging moments in your lives, and that
Yeah.
actually really lent itself to the character and to your performances. And what are some of the unique spaces that you feel like the two of you were able to find emotionally with your characters as a result of kind of how you came into this film together?
You know, the great thing about personal things affecting the actor's experience when you're doing it is that people can feel a rawness, a truth with you, and I think that it informs the thing that you're doing, that the character. And I think that the most beautiful spot is when someone is watching it and you are going through something personal, and it's coming through your character, not your character going through something, the actor going through something emotional. Just in terms of, I always think those are the strongest performances, regardless of what voice they have, what costume they have, whatever. And sometimes it can take away from someone's experience of watching it if they know the exact maybe personal thing the actor is going through, because then it maybe feels like they were tricked or something. But there's that beautiful line where you don't know what it was. You just know that it was real. It was a real thing. And, you think of like a moment like River Phoenix and Stand By Me when he's talking about the milk money, or you just see, oh, that's real. That's not some performance put on. And occasionally you can get there just with a performance, but it's really cool when something real comes up and something personal comes up. And so, but I feel like it's better to know that people were going through something personally and not know specifically what was going on, but that both of us were going through some personal shit, and it made the movie a little juicier, and that people can go and project their own stuff onto it. And you know what I mean? I think it's just like, that's the best. That's why sometimes it's a tough thing with interviews, because I want to talk about it, but at the same time, the movie is the thing, and talking about it can occasionally devalue the experience of watching it. But it's also probably nice for people to know it was real. Like, they're not, if they feel something real from the movie, it's because we were going through something real.
Yeah, no, it's
All right,
really
that's a little
interesting.
long-winded, but
Well, it's really interesting to hear that, and you don't need the details for it to have that impact. And it's interesting to know that that channeled certain emotions for both of you into your performances, because there is so much emotional texture in what you're playing off of each other. And within that, I also wanted to talk about Amir's relationship with his father in the film, because that obviously is so much of who he is, and so much of who he's trying to be and wants to be is all just seeking that validation and that love that he's never getting returned to him. And the script gives so many details throughout about that relationship dynamic, even down to seeing Rob go in and talk to his father. And we learn more about Amir's relationship with him in that conversation, even though he's not in the room. And so, did you find that the script gave you a lot of richness when it came to texturing out that and building a lot of that history and backstory of that dynamic, or kind of what was that journey and process of really figuring out all the elements of that for the film, because it's so crucial to your character?
I think, yeah, there was a lot of richness in the script. And I think that you'd think that more details and more richness might limit your experience, but it actually doesn't. It actually makes it so you can contextualize your own feelings. And, feelings are like it's like a ball of energy. And the cool thing about playing character or something is it gives you a real laser to point it, and it gives you a real spot to put it. So I think I really liked how textured it was, because it made it so like, it gave you a good like outline of where to let the river flow. And yeah, and it's always hard to talk about it without sounding a little pretentious or sanctimonious or something, but that's how I felt. And I felt like the script was good enough and detailed enough that it pointed you in each direction of where to go. And so that's, I mean, that's one in a million. You don't get that in script very often. You just don't. I mean, trust me. I read a lot of scripts, and having that amount of detail is just it's divine.
It also sounds like one of the other things that you often don't get in films is the way that Michael Cernowski, the director, approached directing. It sounds like he was incredibly delicate, incredibly empathetic with his directorial style, but he also was very decisive and knew exactly what he wanted from a scene. So I was really interested in how that translated to the conversations you would have or the way that you would work on scenes together.
He was really precise. Yeah, he was. It's funny. He was really my friend before we started filming. And I feel like sometimes you become friends along the way, but he kind of became my friend before. And so he's so gentle as a person. He's very gentle, but he's also really tough too. He's really got an iron staff. He doesn't get pushed around. Nobody can push him around, but he's just really, really kind, and really humble and really quiet, and kind of talks like this. And I found it really nice for a movie like this. I just did. He just didn't, and I just found that he didn't say much. And I think emotionally, whatever you were going through, very rarely did he interfere with that or say, "Oh, you're going the wrong direction of the scene." He'd mostly say, like, "Walk slower, do that slower." The kind of the dream. That's kind of what you want. You want to feel like your emotions are being held and guided, but for the most part, what's being guided is things that we couldn't ever know. Where to stand in the frame, where to. That's my dream director.
Yeah. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about your approach to auditioning and going after roles, because there's so much that goes into auditioning. And, you've spoken about how you feel like you can go on 100 auditions, but that you've had to kind of create this mindset of not expecting it to go anywhere. And I was interested if that's something that you were always able to put yourself in that specific mindset, or if there was a bit of a journey to landing at that point, because it is so challenging to put so much, you're really hoping and wanting something and putting so much work into every audition, and yet you never know what the outcome's going to be. And it's so much not to do with you as an actor as well, what the final decision is.
I think it's not just that for me though. I mean, I don't know when I said that, but it's not just not, I'm kind of the opposite in the beginning. When I get something, I go, everybody back up. I'm going to incinerate this. I'm going to give it every bit of my heart. There's no one that can get in my way. I don't look anybody in the eye in the audition room. I'm really focused and I really want it. And it is everything that I want. And I think about it day and night, and I obsess over it, and I fantasize about it. And then I eat thinking about it. I talk in a different voice to the cab driver. I get really, really in love with it, to an embarrassing thing. The thing that I've changed is that I took that energy with me after, and now I throw out the sides in the room, and I kind of try to rip it apart and go, okay, that was enough. And I think that that's what people, to care about something, to go back to Pig, Nick says we don't get a lot of things to truly care about. So I really go and try and really care about it. I really try and risk my life for it. But then it's just really important that if you're going to walk out, you throw it in a trash can and move on to the next thing. That's important, because the other thing is, it has nothing to do with you after that point, but it does have to do with you before, and you have a lot of control in an audition room, and a lot of people go too much in the, well, who knows direction, and it's kind of bullshit. Go in and why not memorize all the lines? What do you have that's better to do? Because a lot of people have a million jobs, and they have time to get these lines down to know that scene better than anybody else. And yeah, it always frustrates me if people are looking down their audition. And when I directed a movie, it bothered me a little bit. Like, I guess you can a little bit, but why not go all the way? And then you can say that you went all the way, and I didn't get it, but at least I died on the vine with it,
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to approach it, and want to thank you so much for sharing all about working on this movie. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much,
Thank you
Alex.
so much. You were amazing. It's probably the best one we've done for this movie. Thank you so much.